hey, not much you can do about it, unfortunately. Unless you become cremated, and then you could have your descendants carry you around everywhere. All right. So now the nitrogen goes into ammonia, but not all of the nitrogen gets turned into ammonia. Some of it stays with the carbon in your body. And we learned yesterday in the carbon cycle that when you undergo burial and compaction, eventually the carbon in your body can be turned into a what? Fossil fuel. Now that fossil fuel will be used in many ways, but one way is you can mine the oil from the ground and use it to power your car. But one way people don't realize how oil is used is to actually make synthetic fertilizers that could put onto crops and your lawn. So whenever you have like True Green come up to your lawn and put fertilizer on it, or when your parents put fertilizer on it, that fertilizer is actually based off of the oil from the ground. It's not usually natural. It's not manure or compost. It's usually a synthetic oil fertilizer. Now we learned in the water cycle that if you put too much of anything onto a crop or a lawn, what will happen to the excess? It will run off. So we're going to have the runoff right here. Now, all that excess nitrogen in the fertilizer runs off, and it actually creates a whole big kind of party in the lake or the ocean, because now there's a whole bunch of nitrogen there, and that's awesome for them. They love it, and in particular, algae love it. So you're going to put a whole bunch of circles here because a whole bunch of algae is going to grow in the lake or the ocean. And you might have seen this in certain lakes or ocean, or not oceans around your house, but lakes. They get this green, scummy stuff on the top, and it maybe starts to cover the whole lake. That's a bunch of algae growing, and it has its good and its bad points. The algae love it, but eventually the algae will die, and eventually they will undergo decomp, and they have to be broken down, right? I mean, something has to break them down in the water. And what happens when those bacteria or those organisms break them down, they decrease the amount of oxygen in the lake because they're using it to eat those organisms that are doing the decomposition. And because of their using all the oxygen, what do you think happens to the nice little fishes in the lake? They die because they don't have any oxygen in the water anymore. And we call this a dead zone. Very ominous. This happens at the Gulf of Mexico because of all the fertilizer that farmers use on their crops in the Midwest. It all runs down into the Mississippi River, and it all runs down the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico. And so there's a huge dead zone right now, right at the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico, right where the Mississippi feeds into it. Not necessarily gross, just it actually looks weird because it's very clean almost. It's dead. There's not a lot of organisms that live there because there's not a lot of oxygen. Okay? All right, so let's go back to the car real quick in the house. Now, when they burn their fossil fuels, some of that nitrogen that was in the fossil fuels gets released as a gas called NOx. It could be NO2, it could be NO3. That's why it gets an X, because it could be any of those numbers. And when you put this NOx into the atmosphere, it will eventually go into a cloud. And it will combine with the water in the cloud. And we're going to say NOx will produce HNO3. HNO3 would be a what? A base or an acid? It would be an acid because you got that H there. Acid rain. This is where acid rain originates from, partly. Okay? So now you can draw your little droplets coming down. Yep, but maybe affecting the paint on your car. And we're going to call this acid precipitation because you could have acid rain or you could have acid snow. It could be in any of those forms. Now you might think, well, is this strong enough that, if I were to feel acid rain, I would, my face would start melting. It's not really that strong. I mean, acid rain has been around since the 1970s, and no one's ever really died directly from acid rain. It mostly has effects that are on plant and animal life. So the first thing acid rain does is it decreases the soil pH. Because remember, the lower the pH, the more acidic it is. As a result, this weakens plants. It destroys their leaf tissue. It makes it harder for young saplings to grow because of the acidity. So it's good for the plants. It could sterilize a lake because the soil could not be useful to organisms that would grow, plants that would grow in the lake. And then finally, it could break down buildings or roads. You might have seen maybe a statue, maybe an older statue that made out of limestone, and it looks like it's been kind of rubbed, and the features aren't as distinct anymore. That's because the acid rain has caused some of it to break down, so it doesn't look like it once did. All right, so let's see. We're going to take bless you. Oh, we forgot one thing way back at the beginning. The sun and its energy. When the acid rain comes down, some of this HNO3 will break down into NO3 minus plus H produces HNO3. So some of that NO3 will come off and enter into the soil and be a nutrient for the soil. Yeah, this one has a lot of arrows. We are done, which is positive. It is natural over here on the left, and human alterations over here on the right, just like we've done in the past. From the dead guy to the right is human. From the dead guy to the left is natural. You have to complete the laws and complete the human effects. Make sure you do both of those. As you probably saw today, there can be questions on them. So make sure you know them. Okay? You got 10 minutes. You can use that 10 minutes now to get it done. It'll be one less thing to do next week. All right? So use your time wisely. Oh, and lastly, on Tuesday of next week,